Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's start. Okay, Al-Fatiha. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وعملا وقربا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وأرضنا وارض عنا يا أرحم الراحمين ويا أكرم الأكرمين. Okay, so Bismillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with the opportunity to continue with learning the furu', the rulings of his religion, so we know how to obey him and worship him as slaves. So Alhamdulillah. So last week we talked about a number of topics, wudu, and we talked about ghusl. So today we arrive at the topic of, we're going to talk about ghusl, ma yujibul ghusl, that which necessitates ghusl, those activities, those actions, and we'll talk about water, inshallah ta'ala. So the first thing we're going to look at, inshallah ta'ala, Ya Rabbu. Yeah. So we're looking at this section. It says Faslun Fima Yujibul Ghusl. Right? So Matlabun. Right? So a section on those things which necessitate the ghusl on a believer. Right? Okay. So it says Wal Ma'ani al Mujibatu lil Ghusli. So it goes back to this concept of ma'ani, those things, those matters which necessitate ghusl. We talked about the word, the asl of this word and why it's used in this context. When we talked about, you know, when we talked about the invalidators of wudu, right? So just refer back to that point. So he says, "Wal ma'ani al mujibatu lil ghusl," right? So the matters which necessitate ghusl, and the first thing he talks about inzal. So literally the word means anzala yunzilu, for to drop something or put something down, right? And but here, so Imam al-Maydani rahimahullah ta'ala wa nafa'na bihi, he says infisal, so the separating, so the separating of money, right? So basically when it comes to, for men, women also have discharges that these terms refer to, but for men we're going to look at just three basic terms. You have money, you have, which is sperm or ejaculate, that's the term. So money, then you have madhi, which is what's called precum, which is a discharge when that occurs when a man is aroused, and you have madhi, right? And so money, madhi, which is the discharge when man's aroused, and you have wadi, right, which is basically is prostatic fluid, right? The fluid that comes from the prostate usually comes out before or after relieving oneself after going to the bathroom. And so the first one, money, if it comes out whilst a man's experiencing sexual pleasure, then the ghusl is necessary. As for the other two, it's not, right? And what you'll find, for example, Imam al-Tahtawi in his Hashim Maraq al-Falah, I believe he quotes al-Bahr al-Ra'iq, where is a certain number of furu'. So we won't go into them, but if someone's sure that it's, if they see a discharge and see it's money on the clothes, you have to have ghusl. But if the person is absolutely certain it's one of the other two, and there are furu' connected to that are in the other books, then it's not necessary. But sometimes for ihtiyat, you would perform ghusl if it was madhi. Right. So let's go back to this. So he says, Al-mani, so what is it? So this is sperm, right? Ejaculate. وهو, so it is ماء أبيض خاثر, thick, right? Congealed, right? ينكسر منه الذكر عند خروجه, right? Yeah. So and then he says وتشبه رائحته رائحة الطلع رطبا, and its smell resembles the smell when it's wet. It resembles the smell of الطلع, which is a type of date early in its process of ripening. ورائحة رائحة because it's رائحة البيض يابسا. So when it's dry, so the hal is so رطبا, and يابسا, they're going back to the actual sperm, that wording. So when it's dry, it resembles the smell of eggs. Okay, so inzalul mani. So what makes the ghusl necessary? Inzalul mani. So basically, an ejaculation على وجه, so whilst the man is feeling. So now there are two points here that we need to know to understand the coming mas'ala. One, the first point is the actual ejaculation at the time when the man is feeling the sensation of pleasure at the end of the sexual act. And the second is the actual exit of the liquid from his member, right? So two separate things, right? Because as there's a fara regarding what they mentioned about that if a man was to prevent the liquid from actually exiting, his experiences the pleasure and the sensation and the discharge happens, the process starts normally, but he physically prevents it from coming out of his member. What's the hukum? And so there's ikhtilaf, right? Imam Abu Yusuf said there's no ghusl if he physically prevents it, meaning if it leaves his body at the point of if he leaves his body without after he feels pleasure. So it has to happen at the same time. There's a discharge and then it leaves his body. If he prevents it, no ghusl. Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad said no, because they all agree on this shart, that there has to be the actual ejaculation whilst he's experiencing that sensation. So as long as we agree on that, then the ihtiyat is that we make this the necessary, the sufficient condition for ghusl, and not necessarily leaving the body like that. So let's see what he says, right? على وجه الدفق, right? So إنزال المني على وجه الدفق, so basically ejaculation, and he says على وجه الدفق by way of it getting pushed out. So this is obviously taken from the word in the Quran يخرج من ماء دافق, right? And there's a lot of discussion around that ayah about the tafsir of the verse, and so a lot of the contemporary scholars say so dafaqa, so this is dafiq, we say it's a fa'il bima'na maf'ul here, so it's madfuq, it's pushed out, but a lot of contemporary scholars say no, if you look at the actual cells, the sperm cells within the mani, they're swimming along, they're pushing themselves forward, so it is literally dafiq, right? Anyway, so ala wajhi dafaq, by way of dafaq, being pushed out. So he does a tafsir of that. A dafa', right? Same meaning pretty much. Was shahwa, right? And so at the point of the orgasm, and when the ejaculation occurs, at that point, that if that happens, that's when it's necessary, because the liquids that come out are a combination of liquids that come from the testes and the prostate. So when they're coming out from there, when they're being pushed out from there, at that point it becomes obligatory. So what's the shahwa? He says أي الذي عند انفصاله عن مقره. It's the pleasure someone feels when the ejaculate separates, or it comes out of the maqar, meaning the place where it's stored within the body, and it doesn't. Yeah. So it's not talking about when it leaves the body, when it leaves the place where it's stored at the point where it's getting pushed out. وَإِن لَمْ يَخْرُجْ مِنَ الْفَرْجِ كَذَلِكَ. Even if it doesn't leave the actual member in the same way. كَذَلِكَ. What's the ذَلِكَ in كَذَلِكَ going back to? The على وجه الدفق and a shahwa, right? So even if there's no shahwa at that point when it actually leaves the body, it's sufficient. So according to Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad rahimahumullah ta'ala, that when it leaves the place where it's stored in the body during the sensation, when the man starts ejaculating, at that point ghusl is necessary if it occurs, regardless of whether it exits the member immediately or if it's delayed, right? Okay. وشرطه أبو يوسف. So Imam Abu Yusuf, شرطه, what's the dhamir going back to? Hey, الخروج من الفرج, من الفرج, right? So Imam Abu Yusuf said, the first condition, the dafaq and the shahwa, the inzal bid dafaq wa shahwa, first condition. Second condition, الخروج من الفرج bishahwa, at the time of shahwa, right? That's what it means. فَلَوْ احْتَلَمَ, so if he was to have a wet dream, وَانْفَصَلَ مِنْهُ بِشَهْوَةٍ, and it leaves, the place where it's kept in the body whilst he's experiencing the shahwa. فَلَمَّا قَارَبَ الظُّهُورِ شَدَّ عَلَى ذَكَرِهِ حَتَّى انْكَسَرَتْ شَهْوَتُهُ ثُمَّ تَرَكَهُ فَسَالَ بِغَيْرِ شَهْوَةٍ وَجِبَ الْغُسْلُ عِنْدَهُمَا خِلَافًا لَهُ. So he's saying, so if here you've got a scenario where you've got a person, he said that if he was to, for example, have a wet dream, and he starts ejaculating whilst he's experiencing the pleasurable sensation, and when it comes قارب الظهور, فلما قارب الظهور, meaning when it's close to leaving his organ, his member, شد على ذكره, he holds it and prevents it from leaving, حتى انكسرت شهوته, until the sensation passes, ثم تركه فسال, then he leaves it and then it flows out without him having that sensation at that moment. وجب الغسل عندهما, because their condition is fulfilled, right? الخروج بشهوة, الخروج عن مقره بشهوة, right? That condition is fulfilled. خلافا له, but not for him, right? Imam Abu Yusuf's condition is not fulfilled because he said he has to leave the body when the shahwa as well. وكذا, so that's one situation. Another one, وكذا إذا اغتسل المجامع قبل أن يبول أو ينام, right? And some of the ulama also, and they also mention walking. So someone he slept with his wife, for example, and then he has a ghusl before he urinates, or before he sleeps, or before he walks. And how much is he supposed to walk for this hukum to apply? A few steps, literally, like going from your bedroom to your bathroom would fulfill this condition about the walking as well, right? So we're talking about someone he's he's slept with his wife, for example, and so if he sleeps before having a bath, sorry, he has a bath, he doesn't sleep, and he doesn't urinate, and he doesn't walk very far. So like in the past, people, they would just have a ghusl in a spot in the house. They maybe have a tray or something, because going out, without bathrooms and whatever, so it wasn't, feasible. So they just have a bath in the house. So maybe they stand in a tray and he just has a ghusl right next to his bed, right? So in that situation, for example, if after finishing, he has a ghusl straight away before sleeping, going to the bathroom or walking a distance of a few meters, then if the money was to come out again, then it's that same money, isn't it, right? So because it doesn't just normally start coming out, you have to have that previous condition of inzal bi shahwa. So in that situation, if he's performed the ghusl before sleeping, urinating or walking a distance, then he has to repeat the ghusl because it's that same money that's come out, right? And so Imam Abu Yusuf wouldn't necessitate ghusl, but the two Imams, the Tarafain, Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad did. However, if after he finishes, he sleeps for a while, because sometimes in sleep it can come out, right? So or so he sleeps and then has a ghusl, and then or he urinates and has a ghusl, or he walks a few meters, and like I said, it's like just say going from your bedroom to your bathroom, for example. He walks a few meters, and then he has a ghusl, and then if more comes out, he doesn't have to repeat the ghusl. The خلاصة of this مسألة. وكذا إذا اغتسل المجامع قبل أن يبول أو ينام ثم خرج باقي منيه, and then the rest of it comes بعد الغسل وجب عليه إعادة الغسل عندهما, right? Just before he slept or urinated or walked, right? خلافا له, as opposed to Imam Abu Yusuf, right? خلافا له وإن خرج بعد البول أو النوم لا يعيد, right? So in that situation, he doesn't, لا يعيد إجماعا, right? By the agreement of all of these Imams. Yeah. Okay, then he says, so what necessitates ghusl is basically ejaculation, right? من الرجل والمرأة, right? And the discharge of fluids from a lady as well would also cause it, right? Whether it's through actual intercourse or other means. That's the first one. والتقاء الساكنين ساكنين my mind is going to نحو. والتقاء الختانين, so that's the second one, and the third would be al-hayd, and the fourth is nifas, right? So let's come back to this. والتقاء الختانين, so أو ختانين, so ختانين, so which is basically, the khitan is when the foreskin is removed, and some skin in some cultures is also removed from ladies, and so that area, so it's basically taken from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. إذا التقى الختانان وغابت الحشفة وجب الغسل أنزل أو لم ينزل, right? So here in this situation, it's a metaphorical expression. So basically, upon penetration, and so the hadith says when the head of his member enters, right, at that point, this is the sabab, this is the sabab of the inzal al-mani, and so this is also being given the hukum of ihtiyatan as well. So here the Prophet said sallallahu alaihi wasallam that at this point, when the privates meet, and the head of the member enters or disappears, then it's done, right? At that point, ghusl is necessary, even if there is no actual ejaculation, right? So then it says والتقاء الختانين, which is what تثنية ختان, right? What is that? وهو موضع القطع من الذكر والفرج, right? This is this is what the place where the cutting occurs when the child is circumcised, right? For the men and women. A محاذاتها بغيبوبة الحشفة, meaning محاذاتها, meaning like almost becoming parallel, right? So when they meet with the disappearance of the head of the member. So قال في الجوهرة النيرة, yeah. ولو قال بغيبوبة الحشفة من قبل أو دبر كما قال في الكنز لكان أحسن وأعم. So in Al-Jawharat al-Nayra, he's saying, look, it would have been a better expression in the text had he used this ibara, right? Fill the qubul from the front entry point, and the dubur, which is the rear orifice, the anal orifice. And so this you'll find that there's a certain detachment the fuqaha have when it comes to talking about such matters, and it's to mention the ruling, which is, the fuqaha like to cover all bases, right? So the rulings of all situations are mentioned, and because you know people end up in these situations, right? Waliyadu billah. So in that situation, whether it's the front or the rear passage, it necessitates ghusl if the head of the member disappears. Now, this doesn't mean it's halal, or it's recommended or anything like this. No, but it's just covering that scenario. If someone does this and then they regret it and they wish to make tawbah, and then you know um, they want to be pure. So is this hukum of ghusl necessary on them or not, right? So this is what it is. Why? لأن الإيلاج في الدبر يوجب الغسل, because entry into the rear necessitates ghusl for the person doing it, and للفاعل, as they mentioned, and the مفعول به, right? وليس وليس ختانان يلتقيان. In that situation, there aren't 2 points where there's a khitan, there's just one. So that's why the expression is better. ولو كان مقطوع الحشفة يجب الغسل بإيلاج مقدارها من الذكر. And if the head of the member is has been cut off, then its equivalent amount, right? When that amount is entered, ghusl becomes necessary, right? And then it says وَلَوْ مِنْ غَيْرِ إِنزَال, even if there isn't any sort of ejaculation. This is called iksal in Arabic, right? Iksal, when there's intimacy without any sort of discharge. Why? لأنه سبب للإنزال, right? Because that's the cause of the ejaculation, which is what? وهو متغيب عن البصر and فقد يخفى عليه لقلته, and it's absent from the sight, right? It's not looked upon, and it's sometimes and sometimes because of where it happens in the body. And he said sometimes the amount can be so small, the amount of the discharge, that he might not realize, right? So just the entry necessitates ghusl. ويقام مقامه, right? So in Arabic you say qama. I like this one. Qama maqamahu, right? So qama thulathi, but then when you have the ruba'i, aqama yuqimu, then yuqamu, then you put a dhamma on the muqam, on the mahal, on the dharf. So yuqamu muqamuhu لكمال السببية, because that's sufficient to as a sabab of that, a cause which leads to an effect. So it's given its hukum as well, like we talked about with sleep and the breaking of wudu, right? It says al-khuruj minhuma, sorry, wal-hayd wal-nifas, 3 and 4, right? Meaning at the ending of hayd and nifas, at this point, it's necessary for the lady to perform a ghusl. فما دام باقيين لا يصح الغسل. So as long as these 2 states remain, al-hayd and nifas, ghusl, the hukum of ghusl is not valid, in the sense that it won't leave the person in a state of tahara where they can touch the mushaf, for example. They can touch the Quran and they can pray. As for does it clean you, then clearly yes, it's a bath. Yeah, great. So then we have the next topic, so which is the sunniya, right? So he says matlabun yusannu lightisalu liarba'ati ashya, right? So he says wasanna rasulullahi تشكيل error. وسن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الغسل للجمعة. So this is for the actual, the ikhtilaf we talk about, which is the sunnah a ghusl, is the sunnah a ghusl for the day of Friday or for the prayer, right? And meaning what what is the actual ghusl for? Is it just because of the virtue of the day that you go and have a bath, or is it because of the virtue of the prayer? And the rajih is that it's for the prayer, because hot country, lots of people gathering, and yeah, people sweat, right? So so the dominant position is that to get the maximum reward, the person would have to perform a ghusl for before the prayer, and to pray the Salat al-Jummah with the tahara gained through that, through that ghusl. If someone breaks his wudu and then ends up making wudu again, that same virtue isn't there if he doesn't do it with if he doesn't pray the Jummah, pray with the ghusl. But then there is the position of Sayyidina Hassan ibn Ziyad, we should look at. So للجمعة والعيدين والإحرام, right? The ihram for the Hajj or Umrah, right? كذا وكذا, and also وكذا يوم عرفة, yeah, للوقوف. So it's a sunnah there to have a ghusl there, if it's possible, قال في الهداية وقيل هذه الأربعة مستحبة, right? That's a weaker position. No, they're all sunnah. Yeah, emphasize sunnahs. قال ثم هذا الغسل للصلاة عند أبي يوسف. This is the hukum. This ghusl is for the salah. وهو الصحيح, and that's the correct position. لزيادة فضيلتها على الوقت واختصاص الطهارة بها, right? Because the increased virtue of of this لزيادة فضيلتها, the salah over the time. So meaning what has more virtue, the day of Friday or the Friday prayer? You're saying the Friday prayer, of course, right? And واختصاص الطهارة بها, and that tahara being particularly a condition for the prayer. وفيه خلاف الحسن ibn Ziyad al-Lu'lu'i. So he says no, it's for the day. And for fada'il al-a'mal, you can take this position of Sayyidina Hassan. Sometimes people working on Fridays, they can perform a ghusl at home, but then they're away from home, they go to Jummah from work, or the prayer at work is not possible. Sometimes you need to renew your wudu. So for the fadila, you can intend the position of Hassan, although the dominant position of the madhab is that. And so if we're going with that, so for example, Shaykh Abdul-Rahim Reasat, he says like if someone has to have a ghusl on a Thursday night, which is a Friday, anytime after Maghrib is considered the coming day. So if someone was to perform a ghusl on a Thursday night, they get the fadila, they get the reward of the ghusl of Friday. So that's fine. And then it says وَلَيْسَ فِي الْمَذِي وهو ماء, what is مذي? ماء أبيض رقيق thin يخرج عند الملاعبة, it comes out during foreplay. وفيه ثلاث لغات, and there's three ways you can say this, right? الأولى سكون الذال, مذي, yeah, مذي. So المذي, right? والثانية كسرها المذي, so المذي and المذي. And so this is, sorry, مع التثقيل. So المذي, first one, المذي, and second one المذي, right, مع التثقيل, and the third one الكسر مع التخفيف, المذي. So المذي, المذي and المذي. The different dialects of the Arabs, right? ويعرب في الثالثة إعراب المنقوص. So you can see, so in the third one, so it's al-madhi, right? You're going to do the i'rab of the ism manqus, right? So like qadi, جاء القاضي, رأيت القاضية, the fatha, ومررت بالقاضي. That's all you're going to do. Okay. Misbah Munir is a dictionary. And then he says والودي وهو ماء أصفر غليظ, so yellow liquid, thick, يخرج عقيب البول وقد يسبقه, it usually comes out after urinating, but it could come out before. يخفف ويثقل, right? What does that mean? You can say الودي and al-wadi, right? Okay. Oh, sorry. It's the ya that could be khaffaf. So al-wadiyu and al-wadi. Okay. And this is from Misbah as well. So wal-wadiyu. So laysa fil madhi wal-wadi ghuslun. So it doesn't necessitate a ghusl, right? ولكن فيهما الوضوء كالبول. But rather regarding these two, they necessitate wudu just like urine does, right? So that is basically the section on ghusl, and it's a pretty good summary of the entire chapter. So let's move on now, and we look at the topic of water. Yeah, so which types of water can you use, and which types of water can you not use to purify yourself, right? So let's have a look. So he says مطلب في الماء الذي يجوز به الوضوء وما لا يجوز به. So he says الطهارة من الأحداث. Remember we said there's two types of hadith, right? So we said الحدث الأصغر and الحدث الأكبر, right? So that's wudu, and so the first one requires wudu and the second one requires ghusl. But then when we talked about it before that, he categorized it as haqiqi and hukmi, right? So the haqiqi he called it khabath, so that's filth, right? So that you can use pretty much any liquid, not all of them talk about it, but pretty much any liquid like water, because the point is, you're removing filth. So there's the presence of filth, and you can remove that filth through any liquid, right? That has the same viscosity as water. It will take away the physical traces of that impurity, so therefore it's sufficient. Whereas with al hadath, with the hadith al hukmi, or the najas al hukmiya, there's no physical impurity to remove. So in order to remove that, we have to use a tool that the Sharia has given us to remove that, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He sent water down, He sends water to us, لِيُطَهِّرَكُمْ بِهِ, to purify you with. So the Hanafis say that water is intrinsically purifying, and that's the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent it to us, right? And that's why we have it. So this is where we get this from. So He says الطهارة من الأحداث. So He says al fihi lil ahad. So we talked about this a couple of lessons ago. What does the al here mean? Al refers to the previous tahara he first mentioned. For he says أي الأحداث التي سبق ذكرها من الأصغر والأكبر. Right, the ahdath mentioned, الحدث النجاسة الحكمية, you can say, covers both. وكذا الأنجاس بالأولى, and he also covers the anjas, najasa حقيقية as well, right? She said فقيد الأحداث اتفاقي. So this qaid, this constraint of there being ahdath there, it doesn't have to be there, right? But he's mentioned it doesn't affect the hukum in any way. So he says ليس وليس للتخصيص. It's not قيد احترازي. It's not removing other potential applications of the ruling. It's just saying, it's not that. It's just there because it's mentioned. It's a redundant qaid. Okay. إلا أنه لما ذكر الطهارتين احتاج إلى بيان الآلة التي يحصلان بها. Because he's mentioned the two types of tahara, he needs to mention the tool, the instrument that's needed to perform this with, right? So he says جائزة بماء السماء, right? That the tahara from these types of ahdath, حقيقي حكمي, and the asghar and akbar of the hukmi is jaiza bima is-sama. It's permissible with water that's come from the sky, and this is basically the source of pretty much all water, right? Even sea and spring water and everything, it all comes down through rain and whatever, and Allahu Alam, right? And then he says, so ja'izatun bima is-sama, so water from the sky, rain, right? وَثَلْج and snow. وَالْبَرْد and hailstones, مُذَابَيْن. So when you melt the snow and the hailstones, that's when it comes. He says, وَالْأَوْدِيَةِ, right? Water from plural of wadi, jam'u wadin. That's like اسم منقوص as well. Okay, وهو كل منفرج بين الجبال أو أكام. So what's a wadi? Is basically every gap between mountains and hills. يجتمع فيه السيل. That's where water gathers and flows from. Yeah. والعيون. So water from the sky, whichever form it comes with, liquid or solid, and then you melt it. Springs, valleys and springs. وسعين وهو لفظ مشترك, and we discussed this in usul al-fiqh, right? So it's a word is shared, the wording, the letters and all that, and the sound is shared by many meanings. وهو لفظ مشترك بين حاسة البصر, so it's shared by the meaning of the tool of sight, meaning the eye, or the organ of sight. والينبوع, and a spring in the ground where water comes out of. وغيرهما, and it can mean the sun, it can mean gold, it can mean a number of things. والمراد ها هنا الينبوع الجاري على وجه الأرض, and what's intended here is water that is flowing on the ground. والآبار, and water from wells, which is plural of the word bi'r, right? Or in some, you'll find in some classical books, when they're written, especially all the writing, they'll do tasheel of the hamza and they'll write it as beer, right? But that's what they mean, bi'r, right? And okay, and it says what's a bi'r? وهو أن ينبوع المجتمع تحت الأرض. So it's like a spring that gathers under the ground, right? Sometimes it's just water that's come to a spot and it's settled there, and you take water out of it. And so, sometimes it's basically it's the more you pull out, the more it replenishes itself. So the first type will be a lot slower than, sometimes just immediate, right? Which is where we'll get the rulings about if some najasa falls into a well, you empty a certain amount of buckets, right? Because then you assume that the water that was there initially, that much has gone, and then it will just top itself up, right? And some wells, like Imam Muhammad, he went to Iraq, and some of the wells, they just, because they're so close to the rivers and the underground flow was so strong, he said, okay, just empty 200 buckets, done, right? Okay, it's like emptying the whole well. So then he says, وماء البحار, and sea water, right? جمع بحر. So bihar, plural of bahar, and in the Arabic language this basically means any large body of water. So you can call a river a bahar as well. So he says قال في الصحاح, and Shaykh Abdul-Rahim said to Shaykh Ali Hani that you can say sihah with a kasra on the sad, or with the fatha sahah, so Allah knows best. قال في الصحاح البحر خلاف البر. So a sea is the opposite of land, you can say, right? سمي بحرا لعمقه واتساعه. So the root word bahr has root meanings of something being vast, wide, and deep. So from there they derive the word bahr for the sea, right? والجمع أبحر, and لا يخفى عليكم, this is the جمع القلة, right? This is أبحر, that's why you have the text ملتقى الأبحر, the meeting of the oceans, but because it combined the masail of 4 or 5 mutun, he's used the jam of qilla, right? Abhur. And then the jumu'ul al-kathra are bihar and buhur, right? Okay. So it says وَكُلُّ نَهْرٍ عَظِيمٍ بَحَرٍ. Every big river can be called a bahar. And he says وَلَعَلَّ الْمُصَنِّفُ جَمَعَهُ لِيُمَثِّلَ ذَلك. So maybe the scholar, the author, Imam al-Quduri, he used bihar to refer to all of these situations, right? ولكن إذا أطلق البحر يراد به البحر الملح. But normally in the Arabic language, when you use the term أطلق, when you just mentioned without another qaid, you just mentioned the word bahar, you mean the sea or the ocean. He says, وَلَا تَجُوزُ أي لا تصح الطهارة بمعتصرة. So now here's the mas'ala of, if you're talking about water, if these waters are permissible, then to make wudu and to purify yourself with, what about water from plants and trees? So there are two positions regarding some elements of this in the Hanafi school. So basically they say for fruit and plants and trees, and basically, yes, this waters come from the ground and the roots have absorbed it, but when the plants and the fruits and everything, when all the water goes in them, it becomes part of those things, right? And it adopts qualities and traits from these things. So if it comes out of something like like if you just squeeze it out of something, out of some fruit or a tree or whatever, can you make wudu with it? The dominant position in the Hanafi school is no, you can't make wudu with it. And then they talk about okay, that's if you squeeze it. What if this tree or they're really referring to grapevines? What if they give off, because with grapevines, at a certain point it starts to dripping water, you get drips of water. If you collect all that and you're in a situation where you only had that, and can you make wudu with it or not, right? So the dominant position of that is no as well in the Hanafi school, as Imam Muhammad ibn Abidin, he says that the majority of the scholars of the school have said no, so that's what the reliance is upon. So he says, وَلَا تَجُوزُ أي وَلَا تَصِحُّ الطَّهَارَةُ, that it just won't be valid, right? Not that it's haram, it's just that you can try it if you want, but it just won't be valid, right? بِمَا اعْتُصِرَ بِمَا, so this ma, he says, is بِقَصْر, because not بالمد. If it was with mud, like al-ma it'll be mamduda, it'll be ma'un. So he says here he's not intending the word water, ma'un. He's intending the ism mawsul, ma, meaning alladhi. So بقصر ما على أنها موصولة, it's a اسم موصول. قال الأكمل so this is Imam al-Babarti, Akmaluddin al-Babarti in Al-Inayah, the Sharh of Hidayah. هكذا المسموع, and this is how it's, the mas'ala has been related, right? So وبما تصر, what that's been squeezed from a shajar. So remember, a shajar in Arabic can mean a tree, and it can also mean a bush, right? والثمر, وفي تعبيره بالاعتصار إيماء بمفهومه إلى الجواز بالخارج من غير عصر, right? And so he says in this expression is an indication that if the water comes out without you actively squeezing it, it's fine, right? كالمتقاطر من شجر العنب, like the drops from the grapevines. وعليه جرى في الهداية, and Imam al-Marghinani took this position in the Hidayah. قال لأنه خرج بغير علاج, because it's come out without any actual effort or action done to it, right? ذكره في جوامع أبي يوسف وفي الكتاب, full stop, right? So it's been mentioned in that book as well, right? وفي الكتاب, meaning the مختصر of Quduri, إشارة إليه بحيث شرط الاعتصار. He's saying in the matan, he says ولا تجوز بما اعتصر. So Imam al-Quduri is also hinting at this, because الذي اعتصر, it's that which has been squeezed. So if it comes out without squeezing, if it comes out naturally, it's fine. That's what he's saying. He indicated this, right? وأراد بالكتاب هذا المختصر, right? لكن صرح في المحيط, but rather the text of المحيط البرهاني, صرح, he said explicitly that this is not the case. بعدمه, it's not the case, not valid, right? وبه جزم قاضي خان, and Qadi Khan expressed this explicitly. وصوبه, and Imam al-Nasafi in al-Kafi said he's correct. بعد ذكر الأول بقيل, by mentioning the first with قيل. قيل is called صيغة التمريض, that is the wording that indicates that something's poorly, it's ill, meaning it's a weak position. Yeah. So he says وقال الحلبي, okay, إنه الأوجه, that's the أوجه. So this is another term of tarjih, that it's the strongest position. وفي الشرنبلالية, which is the hashia. So Al-Halabi, it's not very clear here. It could be a number of scholars. It's probably um, probably in the Multaqa. Allahu Alam. Or it could be Ibn Amir al-Hajj. It's probably that actually. The Halbatul Mutajalli, the Sharh of the Munya. He says, وفي الشرم والالية, which is Hashia on Durur al-Hukam. And that's also got two of the excellent Hawashi. Hashia by Maulana Abdul Hakim. That is a two-volume Hashia, I believe. And then there's one by the Imam al-Khadimi. Right? Both of those are excellent Hawashi. All three together with Durr al-Hukam are great. Okay, so عن البرهان he mentions وهو الأظهر واعتمده القهستاني. Right? So as Imam Ibn Abidin says, this is the strongest one. No. Okay, so that bit's clear. So water from vegetation and fruits is not used. ولا بماء غلب عليه غيره, and neither is it valid. So now this next bit is, I honestly think, this is where some of his finest work, right? He summarized some very complex discussions, which one of the best places to learn about them is the Sharh of Nur al-Idah, Maraq al-Falah, or if you've got the edition and the Himma, then its largest Sharh, Imdad al-Fattah, where he explains the rulings of water and when water is mixed with other things, solids and liquids, and what to do. He mentions it in a really detailed way. That's one of the best places to learn it. But if you want a summary, you'll be hard pressed to find a summary as concise and as precise as this. Right? It's really great. So he says, so wudu is not, tahara is not valid bima'in ghalaba alayhi ghayruhu, which something else has dominated it, right? So either the thing which is dominating it is either solid or liquid, right? So he says, first he deals with the solid. Ghalaba alayhi ghayruhu min al-jamidat, things which are solid, right? At-tahira, such as sand or something, or leaves or something like this, right? فأخرجه ذلك المخالط, the thing which is mixed with it, عن طبع الماء, so it changes its nature. So water's nature is what? رقة and سيلان. رقة, it's the thinness of water, like the way water is. Like if you were to put water in your hand, or if you had a bucket or even a little container of water, and if you had a little container of shampoo, if you just hit the surface with your hand, the way it interacts with your hand is going to be different to the way the shampoo would, for example. So it's like that. It's riqa and it's saylan, it's fluidity, it's viscosity, the way it moves. Milk won't flow in the same way as water does, right, at a slow pace. But actually, let's make it even clearer. Shampoo, right, it's a liquid, but or like you're washing up liquid, it won't flow the same way as water will, right? So any solid that mixes with water and changes the way it flows and changes its viscosity, then you can't make wudu with it, right, with this water. So ولا بماء غلب عليه غيره فأخرجه, so it's mixed and then it takes it out of this state. So it's not just the mixing, it's the fact that the state is altered. فأخرجه ذلك المخالط عن طبع الماء, takes it out from the طبع of ما. What's that? الرقة والسيلان, right? Its fluidity and its viscosity. Oh, that's the first thing. It takes it out from its state. Oh, أحدث له اسما على حدة, right? Or it gives it another name, right? Meaning it's changed the very nature of this thing. For example, let's say you get a dissolvable, soluble, that's the word, a soluble, paracetamol tablet or something, right? And you have two glasses here, one in which you pour water in it, right? And the other one where you've put this tablet in, and it's, let's say it's soluble, there might even be bits of it still floating around. Would you call that water anymore, right? The first one you can call it water, that this is water, right? But the other one that you put the tablet in, it's changed it, right? It's changed its nature, right? Actually, no, it's changed the point that you don't call it water anymore, right? So this is clear actually. That example is clear with liquids. We'll deal with liquids, but so either the solid thing has come, it's gone into the water, and it's changed its viscosity and fluidity, so it doesn't flow the same anymore, right? Like mud, right? Like you keep putting soil in whatever, and it stops it flowing in the same way. Or it's gone in, and this object has changed it, so it's no longer considered water anymore, right? So he says, وإنما قيدت وإنما قيدت المخالط بالجامد لأن المخالط إذا كان مائعا فالعبرة بالغلبة. So he's saying, look, when he talked about the water being mixed with a solid object, he said you can't make wudu with it if the solid object has removed its viscosity and fluidity, right? Or it's given it a new name, right? You put something in that it's no longer water, it's affected in such a way that it might still be fluid, but it's not water anymore, right? Or that's the first scenario with solids, and the second scenario is with liquids. So he says he did the qaid above with the jamidat, the thing which mixes the water with jamidat. Why? لأن المخالط إذا كان مائعا فالعبرة في الغلبة, because that thing which mixes with it, if it's liquid, then what's of concern is غلبة, volume, right? So فإن كان موافقا إن كان so forget that comma إن كان موافقا في أوصافه الثلاثة. So if this thing which you mix with water is the same as water in its attributes, what three attributes? So there's two things which you need to learn in this section, which is one, the nature of water, riqqa and sayalan, and the awsaf of water, which we get from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is smell, color, and taste, right? And this is why the ulama mentioned that this is part of the wisdom of the sunnah, is like, you rinse your mouth, hang on, if it tastes different, it tastes too off, it's not water, right? Or when you sniff it up, you're gonna be smelling it when it comes near, right? So if it's gone off, and you can test it also off like that. That's part of the wisdom they mentioned. But this is what you have, right? So things which mix with water, if it's a solid, if it stops the riqqa and sayalan, it's gone. You can't make wudu with it. Or if it changes its very name, meaning it changes the nature of the water. Or if it's a liquid. So if it's a liquid, we're going to look at the awsaf of this water. Water's natural color, which is transparent. Its smell, so it doesn't have a smell, right? Or and its taste, it has a particular taste, the taste of water, right? And even though this taste might vary, like for example, Zamzam tastes unique, but it's still water, and it has that taste. You wouldn't say this is a different type of water. It's not water. No, it is water, right? So if the majority of these awsaf are changed, then you can no longer call it water, right? So if this so if the liquid has three awsaf, just like water, and two of them become dominant, two of them become present in this water, you can't make wudu with it. If one is there, you can't. So for example, like with saffron, right? Sometimes people soak it in water and it changes the color, but the rest isn't changed, right? In that situation, or any other liquid that would change just the color but not the taste or the smell, you can make wudu with it, right? That's with one. If the liquid only has two attributes, right? Such as color, it's transparent, it's the same, and it has a taste, but it doesn't have a smell, right? Then if one of the no, if it's the color, if the color is different to that of water, and it has a smell but it doesn't have a taste, or it has a taste but no smell, if one of those attributes becomes dominant, present, you can't make wudu with it. So this is what he's saying. So he says, Allah. إن كان موافقا, so this غلب, this مائع, this other liquid, إن كان موافقا في أوصافه الثلاثة كالماء المستعمل فبالأجزاء. Excellent. So he says the مخالط إن كان مائعا فالعبرة في الغلبة, right? So the thing which you're mixing with it, right? If it's liquid, then you're looking at the majority, right? And إن كان موافقا في أوصافه فبالأجزاء, then that's with, then you can look at volume, right? So it says الماء المستعمل, so it has no smell. So is it ماء المستعمل, if it's anything else, someone's made wudu, collected all the used water, and you've got a big bucket of it. It doesn't look, smell, or taste anything different to normal water, right? So in this situation, how are you going to treat it? You're going to treat, and if you mix that with some fresh water, then at which point do you have to stop making wudu, right? So he says bil ajza, you're going to go with volume here, right? So technically, it's 51%. Because at that point you say, you know what, there's more non-water than water here. There's more used water, ma musta'mal, than water here. Or they say rose water, like if you leave it open, eventually its smell will go, right? It won't have a fragrance. So 51%. But then the ulama mentioned that at 50% we say you can't make wudu with it for ihtiyat, right? For just out of precaution, then you go make tayammum, right? So he says, إن كان موافقا في أوصافه الثلاثة كالماء المستعمل فبالأجزاء, right? So at 50% you can't, right? As for this 49% used and 51 proper water, then yes, you can make wudu with it, because it's al-maghlub kal-ma'dum, as they say. So that which has been dominated, it's like it's not there, right? Okay. وإن كان مخالفا فيهما كالخل فبظهور أكثرها. And if it's differs with water in its awsaf, its attributes, smell, taste, color, then the manifestation of the majority of them. If there's 3, then 2 manifest. If there's 2 attributes, then 1 manifests. Right? If there's only 1 attribute, then for that to manifest as well. Okay. أو في بعضها فبظهور وصف. Or if like I said here, so أكثرها, so إن كان with it. Now, in كان مخالفا فيها, if it's different to the awsaf, to water in its awsaf, so here you would have 3 awsaf, then for most of them, i.e. 2 to manifest. أو في بعضها, i.e. so it only has 2 awsaf that are different to that water, then for 1 to manifest. فبظهور وصف, meaning وصف واحد. كاللبن, so here I should have sorry. Yeah, so he says now, like laban. Laban is obviously talking about milk, and you might think, well, hang on, what's milk has it's got a color, clearly not the color of water, and it's got a taste, clearly not the taste of water, and he has a smell, clearly not the smell of water. But it depends on your milk, right? Pasteurized and homogenized milk does have a smell, but if you get unhomogenized milk, if you get fresh milk, right, straight from the cow, or raw milk as they call it, right? Sometimes they pasteurize it, that's fine, but when you smell it, it has no smell. Literally, it has 0 smell, right? So in that situation, so you've got a liquid with no smell, right? But you've got taste and color. So if you were to have some water, and you have to pour in a little bit of it, a drop of it, and there's mostly water, but you can see, okay, there's a little bit of whiteness and it's spreading, then in that situation you still call it water. And then you keep putting another drop in, and another drop in, and another drop in. Eventually, again, for a while you can say that's water. It's got a bit of milk in, but that's water. But eventually, when you keep pouring it in, you get to a point where you think, no, you know what, that's not water anymore, that's milk. Yeah. So if the color manifests like that, if this is more white, than closer to being white than transparent. Another way of looking at it is like ink, right? You pour ink into water, and for a point you can call it ma' mutlaq, right? This is called this is just water. But when you keep pouring the ink in, and it starts mixing and it starts coloring the water, it gets to a point where you're not going to say that's water anymore. You'd have to do taqyid, you have to add this qaid of inky water, right? Like that. So then he says, okay. كاللبن يخالف في اللون والطعم, right? But it doesn't differ with water in its smell. وإن ظهر أو أحدهما, if both the smell and the taste, the taste and the color appear, or one of them, right? Yeah. فإن ظهر أو أحدهما, or the أوصاف, منع, you can't make wudu with it. وإلا, and if they don't, لا, لم يمنع. Yeah. And he says وزدت, and then أو أحدث له اسما على حدة. So this is also another thing, that it's giving it another name. So what you just call water, if you just see it in a bottle, if you just see it lying around, if you just drink it, oh, that's water. You can make wudu with that. But if it's been affected by an external source, another liquid or whatever, to the point, so either it's by ghalaba of, so if a solid changes its riqqa and sayalan, can't make wudu with it, right? And or if it's mixed with something and he gives it another name, right? As I said, or if it's a liquid, then it depends on the awsaf. If this liquid has 3 awsaf, just like water, if 2 are manifest, you can't make wudu with it. If it has 2 awsaf, if one is manifest, you can't make wudu with it. Or if you affect it in such a way that you can no longer call it water, right? So this is what he's saying. You can no longer just call it water on its own. It says لإخراج النبيذ التمر ونحوه. So to remove nabidh tamar from the equation, which is what it's based nabidh from nabada, to throw something. So basically they have a pot and they throw dates into some water and they'd leave it, and in this particular type of pot that facilitated and made fermentation easy. In this pot, what would happen is slowly the sugar from the nabidh would come out, from the dates would come out, and it would make the water sweet. And eventually, if you left it long enough, it'd make it alcoholic, right? But it's halal as long as it's not alcohol, as long as it's nowhere near becoming alcoholic, right? You can leave it there for overnight and it's fine. The water will just have a taste. But then there's a point where you wouldn't call it water anymore. You'd call it nabidh, right? So so لإخراج النبيذ التمر ونحوه فإنه لا تجوز الطهارة به ولو كان رقيقا مع أن المخالط جامد. For here in this situation, you can't make wudu with it, even though the thing you put in it is solid, and the water's awsaf remain, the water's taba', the riq and the saylan remain. Why? Because it's no longer water, it's been changed, it's essentially been changed. So that's what he's saying, right? Okay. So he says فاحرص على هذا الضابط. So stick to this ضابط, this rule. And honestly, I'm telling you, he summarized a lot of discussions in this. It's just excellent, expertly done, right? So if he's telling you, the author is saying, learn this, stick to it, be keen about it, it behooves you. It behooves us to do so. Okay. فاحرص على هذا الضابط فإنه يجمع ما تفرق من فروعهم, because it compiles what has been mentioned disparately here and there of the individual rulings, right? وقد مثل المصنف للأصلين اللذين ذكرهما على ترتيب. So he's mentioned the ones he mentioned, غلب عليه غيره فأخرجه عن طبعه أو أحدث له اسما. He's mentioned examples كالأشربة, right? أي المتخذة من الأشجار والثمار. So the drinks or the liquids that have been taken from trees and bushes and and flowers. كالشراب here is here it means syrup, like a type of syrup, sugary syrup. What is it? كالشراب والريباسي. So this is called Rhium ribis, right? Which is it's a type of rhubarb. It grows in Syria. It's called Syrian rhubarb in some places, right? Maybe in Syria. So like that. والرمان, pomegranates. وهو مثال لما اعتصر. This is the example of the things which, the thing you mentioned first, yeah, it's the example of that which is squeezed. وقوله الخل, right? صالح للأصلين, this applies to both as well. لأنه إن كان خالصا فهو مما اعتصر من الثمر, because if you're looking at it as pure vinegar, then it's, it was grape juice once, for example, right? Or fruit juice, then it's been taken out, it's been squeezed from there. But I don't think that's the primary usage, but it applies, right? وإن كان مخلوطا, but if it's mixed, فهو مما غلب عليه غيره بحدوث اسم له على حدة. So if it was water and you kept adding vinegar, then it changes after that, right? It's like fruit juice, the dilute ones, same principle. على حدة. Okay. وماء الباقلاء, right? And باقلاء تشدد باقلاء, right? تشدد فتقصر وتخفف وتمدد وتمد, right? So that's the lam in it. باقلا, so that's the tashdid. And you could say تشدد فتقصر, so you can say باقلاء, right? So or you can say right, sorry, here's how he's saying it, right? So it's تشدد, so there's a shadda first, and then there's a kasra, then it's mentioned with the alif maqsura. Baqilla, so the shadda on the lam, and then you stop it there. Baqilla or baqila'i, that's how you say it. So baqilla or baqila'i, right? Or ma'ul baqila'i or ma'ul baqilla, that's how it is. That's what it means. So to shaddad, the shadda on the lam, and then you mention it as alif maqsura, baqilla, or to khaffaf, so there's no tashdid on the lam, and it's mentioned with this alif mamduda. So baqila'i, right? Al-baqila'u, right? What's this? Is dal, basically, right? Lentils. وهو فول, or big beans, right? أي إذا طبخت بالماء حتى صارت بحيث إذا برد ثخن. So when you cook these things, what happens is the water gets changed. So you've been cooking this dal, these lentils or whatever, and then once you leave it and when it cools down, the water becomes thicker because part of the solid of the the thing has come out and it's affected it, right? It's brought change about. So like what I said about like the paracetamol or something going into the liquid, same thing here, like it's it's in there and it's changed the water, so you wouldn't call that water anymore, right? So that's what it's saying. والمرق, so that the soup that's from a cooking, for making curry. لحدوث اسم له على حدة, because you don't call it water anymore, you call it soup or whatever. وماء الزردج, so what's zardaj? It's bizai, starts with a zai, and it's not zal. Some people seem to think that the name of this letter is zal. It's not. Bizai, bizayin mu'jama just basically means it's a ra with a dot on top of it, right? A'jamahu, he left a mark on it, right? Wara'in, wadalin, muhmalatain. So muhmalatain meaning that the ra and the dal don't have a dot on them, because if you put a dot on the ra, you'd make it a mu'jama, right? You say, and that would make it a zai. And the dal, if you put a dot on it, you make it a dhal, and that would be mu'jama. Without them, it's muhmala, right? And you see this a lot in the books of the fuqaha, just books of Arabic in general. Wajim, right? Ma'u zardaj, right? وهو ما يخرج من العصفر, which is the safflower, is used for dyeing, right? Al-manqu' is when you soak the safflower in water, that which comes out, it's no longer considered water. وَلَا يُصْبَغُ بِهِ, and this particular bit is not used for the dye. And that's a مغرب, which is a dictionary. قال في التصحيح, so Allama Qasim, he said in التصحيح إنه بمنزلة ماء الزعفران. So that's the stronger hukum. He's saying, oh, it doesn't affect it. No, it has the same hukum of ماء الزعفران. نص عليه في الهداية وهو اختيار الناطفي والسرخسي. And the ماء الزعفران, its hukum comes very shortly in the next set of furu'. So he says, مطلب في الطهارة بماء خالطه شيء. So as for water which something has mixed with, what you do? He says وتجوز الطهارة بماء خالطه شيء جامد طاهر فغير أحد أوصافه الثلاثة. So if it changes the riqqa and the saylan, no. But what if it's some a solid is mixed with it, but it's changed one of its awsaf, smell, taste, color? What do you do in that situation? That's what he's saying. So he says ولم يخرجه عن طبع الماء, meaning the riqqa and the saylan. قال في الدراية, one of the شروح وهداية, the fi'ala, beautiful muster for these. قال في الدراية في قوله فغير أحد أوصافه, في قوله open quotes فغير أحد أوصافه close quotes, إشارة, in that is an إشارة إلى أنه إذا غير اثنين أو ثلاثة لا يجوز الوضوء به. Right, that's what it's saying. Then you can't make wudu if it changes two or three of the awsaf. وإن كان المتغير طاهرا, even if the thing which is mixed with it is طاهر. لكن, so that's what he says in diraya, استدراكية. لكن صحت الرواية بخلافه. But that's the thing. Even if it changes more than that, more than one, it is valid. كذا عن الكردري وفي الجوهرة فإن غير النيرة فإن غير وصفين فعلى إشارة الشيخ لا يجوز الوضوء. So if this solid which mixes the water and it changes the tahir solid and it changes the riqqa and the color and the taste, then what Imam al-Quduri says, it's you can't make wudu with it, right? If this tahir thing mixes with it and it changes two of the three awsaf, smell, taste, color, right? You can't make wudu with it. But he says ولكن الصحيح أنه يجوز, but that's the dominant position, right? Oh, that's the correct. I didn't move the slide. Yeah, ولكن الصحيح أنه يجوز كذا في المستصفى, right? Excellent. So that's the dominant there. Okay. Then he says كماء المد. So what's this? ماء السيل. Mad is a sail, a flood. فإنه يختلط بالتراب والأوراق والأشجار. Because when a flood comes, that water mixes with the soil, becomes all murky and muddy, and it mixes with leaves, and it mixes with pebbles, and it mixes with plants and everything, right? فما دامت رقة الماء غالبة تجوز به الطهارة. So as long as the riqqa and the saylan are there, you can make wudu, right? وإن تغيرت أوصافه كلها. Even if all the awsaf, the smell, taste and color, even if they're all changed, as long as it's still flowing in the way water does, you can make wudu with it, right? I mean, so this is a situation where you'd have to, right? And you don't have other water, or it's a choice between this water or tayammum. Can you make tayammum? No, because you have this, right? It's like that. Okay. وإن تغيرت أوصافه كلها وإن صار الطين غالبا لا تجوز. And if the soil becomes dominant, like if it becomes more mud than flowing water, you can't make wudu with it, as we mentioned earlier. والماء الذي يختلط به الأشنان والصابون والزعفران. So, and water, so it's وتجوز الطهارة به this ماء, and وتجوز الطهارة به الماء الذي يختلط به الصابون الأشنان what they call potash, right? It's basically wasabun and za'faran is these liquids that are used sometimes like sidr as well to enhance the cleaning properties of water, right? ما دام باق على رقته وسيلانه. So that's the hukum of the saffron as you mentioned. لأن اسم الماء باق عليه. So even if you use some soap or whatever and it was mixed with that, you still, it's called water, soapy water. It's taken from the hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the Sahaba, his camel threw him off and he broke his neck. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because it's wajib, it's fard to wash the deceased. And so he told them to boil sidr, right? And then to use that water to wash him. So even if there's a slight change, whatever, it's the cost of these things is al-mubalagha fi tanzif, to clean more efficiently. So in that situation, it doesn't affect it. Okay. So then he says, ما دام باق, as long as this ما دام باق على رقته وسيلانه. Why? لأن اسم الماء باق فيه, because you still call this water. واختلاط هذه الأشياء لا يمكن الاحتراز عنها, and you can't avoid mixing. There are needs of society basically. فلو خرج عن طبعه أو أحدث له اسم على حدة. So if it's no longer has the same riqqa and saylan, or is given a new name, كأنصار ماء الصابون, it gets to the point where you say, oh, this is soap water, not just water, right? أو الأشنان, right? أو الأشنان, or the ashnan becomes thick, like we talked about with lentils. أو صار ماء الزعفران صبغا, or the water with the saffron, this is what you do. It's placed in the water to make this like yellowish dye. And if it's there for a small amount, just like we said with the safflower, if it's there for a little while, it's just colored water, right? But if you were to basically leave it there for a long time, its color would come out and it would remain in that really strongly. So that's used for dyeing wool and stuff like this, right? So there's a difference between the stages. An earlier stage, it's fine, you can make wudu with it. But when it gets to the later stage where it's a dye, right? Anything it touches, it's gonna stain it. Then no, you can't. لا تجوز به الطهارة. Okay, excellent. Do you have any questions? Or is this here? Okay, if you got any questions, just stick them in. Put them in the chat box. I'll answer them. Okay, and then so he says, we have the next bit, and it says, مطلب في الماء إذا وقعت فيه نجاسة. Now this is an important section. So let's look at this. So we looked at water where you have something tahir falling in it. So if it's solid, what to do? If it changes the riqqa and saylan, if it's liquid, we look at the awsaf, or if it's cooked with, or if it's changed its name. Now, what happens if something najis falls into this water? So now you have three scenarios. You have, or two, you could say. You have the scenario where the water is flowing, or the scenario where it's not flowing. So, but if it's not flowing, it's either a small body of water or a large body of water. A large body of water and flowing water have a similar hukum, and then you have the small body of water. Right? So let's see, what's he saying? He says, مطلب في الماء إذا وقعت فيه نجاسة وكل ماء وقعت فيه نجاسة لم يجوز الوضوء به لتنجسه. That water has become impure. You can't make wudu with it. قليلا كان الماء so قليلا كان الماء, so whether the water is a small amount or a large amount, right? You talk about the large amount though. It says تغيرت أوصافه أو لا, right? وهذا في غير الجاري وما في حكمه كالغدير العظيم. So when he says وما في حكمه, so it just mentioned هذا في غير الجاري, so 1. وما في حكم غير الجاري 2, which is what الغدير العظيم, so a large body of water. So like you can have a swimming pool, for example, or you can have um, a lake or a big pond, right? So when he says قليلا كان الماء, he's talking about, for example, a glass. You have a drop of blood falling into it, right? أو كثيرا, in like a big barrel, right? So technically this is all called al-ma'ul qalil. Anything that's not a large body of water, you call it ma'ul qalil, but he's expressed it differently, right? I'm giving you the way it's expressed in the Nur al-Idah Maraq al-Falah. It's just a lot clearer with that. So then he says بدليل المقابل, and we get this from the understanding of its opposite, which is what? لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أمر بحفظ الماء من النجاسة, because the Prophet told us, don't let najasa get into it. How? بنهيه عن ضده, by forbidding his opposite. لأن النهي عن الشيء أمر بضده, because when you forbid something, what you're actually doing is telling the person to do the opposite. فقال لا يبولن أحدكم في الماء الدائم, perpetual, meaning he means still, يعني الساكن. None of you can urinate in it, right? ولا يغتسلن فيه من الجنابة, because when you have janaba, there's going to be some najas on your body generally, right? And so you can't make wudu in it, right? You can't have a bath in it. قد استدل القائلون بنجاسة الماء المستعمل بهذا الحديث, and some of the ulama said that ماء مستعمل, I believe this is the position of Imam Hassan ibn Ziyad, that used water is najis, but clearly it's not, right? But this is what the hadith, this is the hadith they use. حيث قرن الاغتسال بالبول, where the Prophet ﷺ combined, the hukum of اغتسال with the hukum of urinating. Urine is najis. So the ikhtisal, even if there's no najasa on this person's body, but he's performing wudu there, so you can have used water falling back in, right? So they said, well, that used water must be najis, right? But it's not the case. We'll look at that later. Okay. وأجيب, and the response our ulama gave, بأن الجنب لما كان يغلب عليه نجاسة المني عادة جعل كالمتيقن, and he said that the response they gave is generally someone who's performing a ghusl from janaba, he'll have money on him, right, from the act. So that's given. So even though that's generally the case, so that general case is expressed the hadith expresses the scenario of that general case being a permanent case, like always. This is always the situation. Why? Because this is what most people will find, right? Most people that are in this situation, that need to make ghusl from janaba, they'll have some sort of najas on their body. That's what he's saying. So the ada is treated like yaqeen. Okay. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم أيضا إذا استيقظ أحدكم من منامه فلا يغمسن يده في الماء حتى يغسلها فإنه لا يدري أين باتت يده. So clearly this hadith saying that when someone's asleep they might touch some sort of najasa that's exited their body, so don't go sticking their hands straight into water. That's what he's saying. يعني لاقت محلا طاهرا أو نجسا, you don't know, right? ولولا أن الماء ينجس بملاقاة اليد النجسة لم تظهر للنهي فائدة. If it wasn't the case of a hand that's touched najasa, it's got najasa on it, then this prohibition, there'd be no point in mentioning this prohibition, right? But he did. Okay, so I think this is a good place to stop, because the hukum is we've got a long section coming up. So yeah, we'll stop it here and we'll continue from this point next time, inshallah ta'ala. So alhamdulillah, we're making good progress, and so we'll continue from here, inshallah. Does anyone have any questions? And if not, okay, that's fine. Okay, great. Let's stop it here, and yeah, we'll see you on Sunday, inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.